Well, aloha. It's a beautiful day here in the Colorado Rocky Mountains. My name is Lono. I'm a Kahuna priest, and I want to talk a little bit today about what's real about this Arab and Israeli conflict that's going on and how it ties in with an ancient Hawaiian prophecy, believe it or not. As far removed as those two places are in time and space, you'd wonder how the two of those have anything to do with each other, but they do. And let's talk about this a little bit, because it's important. Before I get into this, what I do want to say is that I am very aware of, as a Kahuna priest, I'm still very aware of the Bible. When I was a little boy, my parents sent me to a Benedictine monastery when I was 13 years old. I knew I was going to be born to be a priest. I just didn't expect it would turn out to be a Kahuna priest that would take me 35 years of my life to get there. But the key is that I have read the Bible thoroughly many times. I have researched the Bible carefully. I very much understand, I think, where the Jews and the Christians and the Muslims are coming from when it comes to this whole thing. And I think it's tragic that this place that's supposed to be the Holy Land, the birthplace of all of these worldwide religions, the Muslim religion, the Jewish religion, and Christianity, this Holy Land has been a scene of more murder, bloodshed, rape, heartache, man's inhumanity to man of any other place on the earth. And that's supposedly the Holy Land? Wow. So let's talk about the real origins of this whole thing. People want to get all wrapped up in whether or not it's the Israelis' fault. You know, you have all these people from these universities now that are saying, oh, this is all Israel's fault, that they're getting attacked and that all of this is happening. And then the Israelis are saying, we have a right to defend ourselves. You know, when people are going to come in and kill our children and our wives and rape our kids and wives and behead our babies, that we have every right in the world to go in and decimate the people in Gaza and the people known as Hamas. Well, in Huna, which is the Hawaiian way of high order awareness, what we realize is that you get these intractable problems. They're always a derivative of the real problem that's not being discussed. So let's go back and look at the real problem here between the Arabs and the Jews, see where it started, and see what's real about it. And the whole thing starts about 4,000 years ago, not in 1967, not in 1951, not when the United Nations made nation its own, Israel its own nation. None of that was the cause of this war. The cause of all of this goes back to a man named Abraham over 4,000 years ago. And supposedly this man named Abraham was a person who was quite wealthy, had lots of big lands, lots of flock, all that kind of, sheep, had lots of wealth. And he was known as a very generous man. People liked him. And he came out with the idea of a monotheistic God. But that monotheistic God that he comes up with is an anthropological God, very much on the order of the Viking gods or, the Greek gods, that there's very little difference between a human being and God and the creator of the universe. What a joke. What a joke. Now, I do have to tell you, I've died twice. I have met God. I know who God is. And God has nothing to do with the anthropomorphic being that all of these three main religions want to claim that that's God. No, that's not God. The only definition for God that can possibly make sense is that God is all that is, and everything is a part of that God. And the idea of an anthropological God is ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. So, now that I've probably managed to offend every Jew, every Muslim, and every Christian in the world, and that was not my intention, but I'm just trying to tell the truth and point out what's real. There is no anthropomorphic God that plays favorites, that has a favorite people, that's going to punish one group of people in favor of another group of people. I know God, and God does not operate that way. It doesn't happen. So Abraham is this wealthy man living in this land and winds up getting the direction from God to move with his brother Lot into a new area, and there he's going to make many nations. And Abraham is visited by an angel. That's the other aspect of this anthropomorphic God, that God speaks to people as a man and tells people what they're supposed to do and how they're supposed to do it. So there's a certain element of truth in that, interestingly enough, but not in the sense that it is portrayed in the Old Testament. So Abraham does in fact move, and he's in his 80s, and he doesn't know how he's going to become the father of many nations. Because in those days, the way it worked is the firstborn son gets the father's birthright. That's what's meant by a birthright. It's why kingship always passed from one king to his firstborn son, and then from that firstborn son's firstborn to another firstborn son. This kingship was passed down. Lands, property, inheritance was also passed down to the firstborn son. And so Abraham's firstborn son came about because he wasn't able to have a child with his wife Sarah. Sarah was barren, and she was unable to have a child, which was a great big problem in those days. It was an embarrassment. It was considered, if somebody was barren, it's considered punishment for some previous sin that she'd committed, perhaps. That's just the way people looked at it in those days. And so she told Abraham to take her handmaiden Hagar to wife. She, in fact, did get pregnant and had a child named Ishmael. And Ishmael was the firstborn, and he was 14 years old by the time that Abraham ever had a child with Sarah. And the way that whole thing worked is that Sarah got very jealous of Hagar. There was some conflict in the home. Originally, Hagar escaped from Abraham's home because she was being mistreated by by Sarah. But God appeared to her and told her to go back to Abraham. And it was after she got back that Sarah wound up getting pregnant. Abraham was visited by a couple of angels who were commiserating with him about how horrible the land of Sodom and Gomorrah were, and Sodom was the land where his brother Lot had set up his flocks and his lands. And Abraham was then also told that Sarah was going to have a child the next year, which they considered kind of ludicrous because Sarah at that point was 80 years old. But nevertheless, God is able to do all these things, and so she in fact did get pregnant, and she had a son by the name of Isaac. And Isaac was, of course, loved by Sarah, and she didn't care too much for Ishmael and Hagar. And when Ishmael began teasing Isaac in a way that Sarah didn't appreciate, she kicked Hagar out completely. And that disturbed Abraham, but nevertheless, Hagar was sent out into the desert where her son Ishmael became the father of many nations. And so did Isaac. And how that happened was that Abraham was told to take Isaac to this area and have a sacrifice unto God. But what Abraham didn't realize is that God was going to ask for Isaac to be the sacrifice, not some calf or some kind of an animal. That's the other thing. God does not require sacrifices, whether it's a person, whether it's an animal. That is not how God operates. Never has, never will. But that's how these people looked at it back in those days. You're supposed to sacrifice something to God to gain God's pleasure and to gain God's favor. And so when Abraham took his son out to this rock to sacrifice him, he didn't know that Isaac was going to be the sacrifice. But nevertheless, when they got there, Isaac gathered up a whole bunch of wood, so they were going to burn the sacrifice on the altar, and he didn't know he was going to be the sacrifice. But basically he trusted his dad, and just as his dad was getting ready to plunge a knife into his chest, he was stopped by an angel of the Lord who said, "Just kidding, you don't really need to kill Isaac. We just wanted to test your faith." Well, God doesn't do that either. Now that rock is significant because later on that's where the supposed first and second temples of Jerusalem were built. And after the destruction of the second temple, the Muslims a couple of hundred years later built the Dome of the Rock. And now if you go to Jerusalem, that Dome of the Rock is built on top of the rock where Abraham supposedly sacrificed Isaac. Now, I am not an expert, and anybody out here who wants to, listening to this, who wants to correct me is welcome to. But as I understand it, the Muslims, they don't buy into this story. For the Muslims, they honor Abraham as one of the prophets, starting from Adam, going all the way till the end when Muhammad will be the final prophet. And Abraham was one of the prophets, but he gave his birthright to his firstborn son, Ishmael. And Ishmael has the birthright, meaning he's God's favorite, not Isaac. So they claim that all of this land that now Israel occupies was stolen from them. It was given to Ishmael, and Ishmael was going to be the father of many nations, which are now in place over in the Middle East, all kinds of Arab tribes and families. And the Jews didn't get any inheritance from Abraham, and they're usurpers. And they absolutely believe this. To this day, they absolutely believe that the Israelis are stealing their property. So it's just a bunch of religious beliefs that are causing people to decide that they need to be right, they need to make the other side wrong. Hanging in the balance are the economic benefits of the land and where they live and all of the resources of the land, and they want it. So over this little piece of land, there's been more murder, more man's inhumanity to man than any other place on the planet. That should tell you something. If this is such a holy place and God spent so much of his energy in this place trying to protect all of these favorite people, how come it's the place where there's more bloodshed, more murder, more stuff going on than any other place in the world? So that's the real story of where all this begins. As far as the Arabs are concerned, the Jews are usurpers. They've stolen their birthright, and they take that seriously. Here's what I can tell you for sure. The one moral boundary that we can't cross is we can't violate another's sacred space. And you can make an argument from the Bible that Israel stole the land from the Arabs. I don't think it's much of an argument. It's based on the flimsiest of evidence, but it's real to the people who are the Arabs who believe in it. They train their kids this way from the time the kids are little kids. The Jews and the Christians are infidels and are not worthy of existence on this earth. And so they're capable of every manner of nastiness that they display to the Jews. And they're very capable. It's ingrained into the kids from the time they're little kids. It's easy to say that Hamas does not represent all Palestinians, and I'm absolutely sure that's true. But what happens if you lived next door to a neighbor, and that neighbor is absolutely convinced that you have no right to be there, that you're squatting on his or her land, and therefore they have the right to do what it takes to move you out of there? And if that involves putting a bomb under your car, shooting your child while they're playing out on the front yard, that sort of thing, you'd probably not think that that was an appropriate way to behave for your neighbor to be treating you. I know that if I were in Israel right now, living in one of those kibbutzes, and somebody, I wake up in the morning getting ready to, I don't know if the attack occurred there in the morning or not, but when Hamas last weekend began their latest invasion of Israel, if I see people walking around my yard with automatic guns, shooting my children, trying to kidnap my daughter, that sort of thing, I would, if I had any way to defend myself or my family, I would. Now, the other problem that goes on with all of this stuff is you never know who to believe. What you know for sure is that they're fighting and they're killing each other. But today, as an example, there was some sort of an explosion at a hospital that killed 500 people in Palestine. The Palestinians are claiming that it was the Israelis. The Israelis say that they don't have any plans, interest, or have never participated in the bombing of innocent civilians in a hospital, and that what it really was a Palestinian rocket attack that went bad, and those rockets landed on the hospital and they killed all these people. Who knows? I don't know. I wasn't there, and you have to believe one side or another. And that's when you know that you're caught up in a conundrum that has its roots in a much earlier issue. And that's where we get back 4,000 years to Abraham and the fact that there's this controversy over who gets the birthright, Hagar's son or Sarah's son. And all of the murder and all of the killing and all of the hardships that the world has had to undergo as a result of that. Can you picture that? Is that something that your God would want? Is that something we can blame on God? A proprietary God that plays favorites? I don't think so. I think what we blame that on is incredible unconsciousness on the part of human beings that don't understand or won't accept that we all come from the same place. We all come from God. We're brothers and sisters in God. Our job is to respect the divinity in one another. Now that gets me to the Huna prophecy, and that is that there was going to come a day when the same thing that happened to the Hawaiians would happen to the entire world. And what happened to the Hawaiians is there was an invasion from Tahiti, where the Tahiti Alihi came to the islands and totally destroyed the Mo'o, which was the culture that had existed there for 2,000 years. or as much as 2,000 years. I don't think historically it's possible to date it anymore. It's too long ago, but certainly over 1,000 years ago to 2,000 years ago, the Mo'o in Hawaii had created the most incredibly aware, conscious culture that the world has ever known. And the Ali'i, when they came from Tahiti, destroyed that. And there were a gruesome genocide that was, people would be stretched out over a rock and their beating hearts were cut out of their chests. They were thrown off of cliffs. Parents were asked or ordered, had to watch the murder of their children. The children had to watch the murder of their parents. Just as brutal as everything that's going on in Israel and Palestine today. People are capable of incredible inhumanity to men when the opportunity presents itself. So the Hawaiians said this was going to happen again, and that it was going to happen because pain is the universe's way of getting people to wake up. And that's certainly true in my case and in the case of everybody I've ever known. A lot of times you get into a mindset where you're just absolutely sure things need to be this way or that way, and you get all kinds of pain. And you keep getting pain, and you keep getting pain, until finally you've had enough pain, and you look at life from a higher point of view, and all of a sudden you see solutions you couldn't see before. And that's what's going on for the entire human race right now. Look at the weaponry we have. If all of this thing boils down into an incredible nuclear war, and it could easily, the death and destruction across the entire human race is going to be staggering. And the Hawaiians said this is what was going to have to happen for the universe to wake up humanity so that they could own the fact that there is no such thing as a proprietary God. And there's only one God, the God of us all. And then Huna goes on to describe how a new society would work. And that's something that I teach people about in our classes. And it's common sense. When you look at it, you say, yeah, that would be what would have to happen in order for all of this to go away. We would have to be able to have the Arabs and the Jews agree that they all come here from the same place. They're not only cousins, but they're brothers in God, brothers and sisters. And that what they owe one another is the respect due a fellow divine being. So the people who live in that part of the country are respected. They have sacred space. The Palestinians are treated with respect. The Jews are treated with respect by the Palestinians. That's the only way this is going to get resolved. But to do that, you're going to have to give up this ludicrous belief in Abraham and his proprietary anthropomorphic God who plays favorites. And if we don't get over that, there's a lot more pain that's going to happen. And apparently these people don't love their kids very much. Because if they loved their kids, they wouldn't want to see their kids grown up in an environment where two sides hate each other so much. When the Arabs pulled off these attacks in Israel, tens of thousands of them around the world are dancing in the streets, celebrating. And there are people out there that are just really thinking, yucking it up, that the Palestinians are out there doing this. And the other thing that's interesting, another episode of unconsciousness, is the denial that goes on. So here are the Arabs coming into coming into Israel from Gaza, and they're beheading children, they're killing little kids, they're raping women, they're taking hostages. And you know what the Palestinians are saying on TV? It's not true. The Israelis are doing that to their own kids, just in order to have another excuse to persecute the Palestinians. And of course, if you're a Palestinian and you don't know any better, you don't want to believe that your own group is out there beheading kids. So it must be true. It must be the Israelis doing it, because they're evil people. They're nasty. They're the scum of the earth. And it just goes on and on and on and on and on. So if you're out there and you're listening to this whole thing, you know, if you want to take a side that works, take the side of those who say there is no birthright that was given to Abraham that justifies any of this killing. That's a perfect example of why Christianity, Judaism, and the Muslim faiths are all in serious error about who they think that God is. And then let that launch you into a discussion and an investigation about the nature of God, the true nature of God. Who is God really? Do you have the guts to do that? If you're a Christian, do you have the guts to do that? If you're a Jew, do you have the guts to do that? If you're a Muslim, do you have the guts to do that? Can you look at God in a way that transcends that proprietary stupidity that you've been locked into for generations? It's not necessary. That stuff does not get you closer to God. I've died twice. And I can tell you that God does communicate to each of us inside in ways that we can know for sure are God's voice. And one of the things that you can know for sure is that God will never tell you that you're someone special and therefore you should hate your neighbor so that you can be worthy in the eyes of your God, especially when that neighbor doesn't believe in the same God you believe in. It's so sad. And hopefully our world will use this pain to wake up. What we'll be talking about next, and the next one, is two Americas. An America that I absolutely love and would die for in a heartbeat, and an America that I absolutely despise. And we'll talk about those two Americas and the difference between them and what's happening in our world today and what we can expect. So we have a great day. I hope you enjoy this, and please check out our classes. There'll be a link below into our classes on high order awareness and chronic debilitating disease. So unconsciousness is the problem in every area of life. And when people hang on to these justifications for being positional and I'm right and you're wrong, and they've got to make you wrong to the point where they can hurt you so they can be right, it's time for all of that to end. And it's going to end, and it's going to end in a hell of a lot of pain. So I'd suggest you join the family. In those days when all this pain is coming, you're going to appreciate having a family that you can be close to, that shares your values. And our Eagle's Nest family is that family. So join our family, take advantage of our classes, and stop the hate. There's no need for it. And stop taking sides in parties that are hating each other. And that goes for Republicans and Democrats. It goes for people in Ukraine and Russia. It goes for Jews and Arabs. There's no room for hate in your life. It's not going to work. Aloha.